I want us to just go ahead and get started. And again, this is being recorded, so if you have to leave early, you will get some information about where you could see this. My name is Wyvetta Bullock, and I serve as associate to the bishop. My portfolio includes relating to the Southwest Conference, and I'm glad to see one of our deans on, Pastor Nathan Klein. Welcome, Nathan. And I also serve with retirees. And so I saw a few of you yesterday at the retiree lunch. It's nice to see you again. And I'm convening the African Descent Ministry Strategy Team. And then Interim Ministry, which is what we're about in this lunch and learn time. And I see other folks are being able to join us, and that's great. I'm delighted to share with you what the current activities are. And welcome, Bishop. I know he's in the office today, and I don't know if you'll be with us live all the way or not, but anyway, now I can't see all of you because I guess I've been kind of posted up here, but welcome to those who are just joining. That's okay. I know somebody else will be kind of monitoring and helping us as people join. So I'm glad to be able to share with you some updates as well as a new resource, and I'll talk to you about the resource at the end. But what I need to do now is share my screen and see if I can get my slides going here. All right, can everybody see? Okay, very good. All right. Just want to kind of see who's in the room, and those of you who maybe how many of you are serving as interims now? If you could raise your hands. I can't see all of you, but let me see. I see 1, 2, 3. Hi, Krista. Nice to see you. Okay. How many of you are in a congregation that's currently being served by an interim? Anybody? You're here okay, a congregational member. I don't see any hands. Oh, there's a hand there. Well, so most of you who are in the room are either our rostered leaders serving as interims or those interested. I know we've got some lay leaders here too who may be looking at interims in the future. So just welcome everyone. And there are at least 3 or 4 Synod staff with us today. Pastor Kyle, who is associate to the bishop for candidacy and mobility, is with us. And then Tom Anderson, our general manager, is with us. He will be monitoring the chat and kind of helping me see how things are going. Let's see. And then Bishop Curry, I mentioned, I saw that he was joining us perhaps. I see Heather Haynes. I don't know, Gabby was in the room with Tom. So you have a few other staff resources during this workshop as well. But I'd like for us now to enter in with prayer and then get the workshop started. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
God, we thank you for your faithfulness. Be with us as we explore interim ministry in the Metropolitan Chicago Synod. Guide our conversation, our questions, our wonderings. May your spirit show us the path that you would have us take. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, some of you may be wondering, why do this workshop on interim ministry? Well, people in the Synod have been asking about how are interims selected. We've had more, I think, rostered leaders becoming interested in interim ministry. And we also have to note that we've had some congregations who've not had the best experience with Interim Ministry. So we wanted to have a chance for those who have questions and who are interested to come together and hear what's happening now, what we're thinking about as a Synod. And so this workshop is really a response to inquiries about this ministry. All right. Now, I think some of you have had experience. Either you've had an interim in your congregation, you are an interim. I'd like for you to take time as we're going forward to put your comments about your experience, 1 or 2 words, doesn't have to be long, in our chat, and just write those in so that we as a Synod make sure that we can capture that. So 1 or 2 words about your experience with an interim pastor or as an interim pastor, and just use our chat box and we'll collect those, and Tom will help us monitor that. So, and then if you have questions about clarifications about anything I'm saying for these next few minutes, if you use your raise hand feature, or even just raise your hand, and I think Tom would be able to see that, and he would also then be able to help me make sure we're trying to address the questions that you have. But I want to start us out naming that we have 13 trained interims right now in the Synod. And I am delighted and excited about that. When I started in this role about a year ago, we had, I think, 2, maybe 3. And my goal was that we would have 12 by the end of the year. And so I'm delighted to say that 13 of our rostered leaders have participated in training for interims. And I'll talk a little bit more about that training as we go forward, but I'm grateful for that. I also realized that you may know that we've had a variety of practices and some inconsistency across the Synod with interim ministry. And so what we're hoping to do is to change that, to get a more unified process so that congregations know what to expect, so that our interim rostered leaders know what to expect. So we're not trying to go back to where there are, say, contracts or agreements, covenants with leaders or congregations right now. But as we move forward, we are looking at a more unified and systematized approach. So what is an interim pastor? Well, you know, we could sum it up to say it's someone who serves at a time of transition in a congregation, that time between when we would say, regular called pastor leaves and a new person comes, so that it's that transitional time for a congregation. The interim serves as the pastor. Now, you may have heard terms like a traditional interim. And in this Synod, when we talk about that, it's basically to say that person who is serving during the time of transition from one called regular pastor to the next. But then we also talk about intentional interims. And when you hear that, we're usually talking about someone who has additional special training for challenging settings, misconduct, for example, a congregation where there's quite a bit of conflict. And maybe we have a pastor who's had a lot of experience or training in that. And so we know we need to put or place someone in a congregation that has some special skills. And that's when we'd be thinking about intentional interim. And then a sabbatical interim pastor is just kind of what it sounds like. It's someone who would serve for 2 or 3 months during the time that the called pastor is on sabbatical, but is expecting to return. The role of a pastor. So what's a interim pastor going to be doing in that transitional time? Well, there's the ongoing pastoral care and leadership, the preaching, the presiding, the pastoral care. And those duties can vary maybe a bit from congregation, depending on the lay leadership in a congregation and the availability to do, let's say, some of the pastoral care, some of the visitation, and even maybe there's lay preachers in a congregation. But this interim pastor is responsible for the worship, for the preaching and presiding, making sure that that is covered and taken care of. There's also the congregational assessment and self-study. And this is a very important task. The interim guides the congregation through a process of looking at its trends and its practices to say, what's really going on in the congregation, what has been the practice of the congregation. And the interim assists in pulling this information together, which is also helpful for the MSP or the ministry site profile. Now, this document, the ministry site profile, needs to be prepared because the Synod doesn't start a call process with the congregation until there is an updated ministry site profile. So a congregation needs this document. And part of the role of the interim pastor is to make sure that the document is completed, that it's accurate, that it's updated, and that it is filed in the system. I want to note here 5 areas of transitional work that's lifted up by the Interim Ministry Network, and some of you may have been trained through that network. I put the website address here, imnedu.org, and if you go there, you'll find the training that they offer. They also have resources. I took the training back last spring for the kind of foundational transitional leader training, and I found it to be very helpful. And I've recommended it to rostered leaders who have contacted me and are interested in interim ministry and are open to training. But the network lifts up 5 particular areas. Heritage is what they say, they call it, and it's really just a review of the congregation's history. Where are the milestones? What has been the practice of this congregation for mission and ministry? And so just to look back before the congregation is ready to take that step forward in calling a new leader. Another area is leadership, looking at the needs in the congregation, particularly the lay leadership, developing, helping that leadership to be prepared for a new pastor. And then mission, defining a sense of purpose and direction. I know for several years as I worked at church-wide office and I worked in the division for congregational ministry, we did a lot of data research with congregations that themselves would say that they're vital, but also that their synod would agree that they had a healthy ministry in their community. And a couple of things that we saw across demographics that these congregations had in common. And one was that sense of purpose. And so, discerning or asking what God is calling them to be and do is real important. And it's lifted up here as part of that transitional work. And then connecting with the community around them. The interim pastor helps the congregation take a look at how it is being how it's in the community. Who is it connecting with? How is it making itself known and of value with alliances and partners around its own facility, etc. And then what you might expect, of course, future is to help the congregation develop its profile. We talked about the ministry site profile, but also the profile for the pastor that they would hope to call once this interim work is completed. So it's not just to say, well, this is the kind of pastor that the congregation had. And so we're just looking for somebody to step in those shoes and do the same thing. Now, you might end up there once you do the work, but there is a very important task of thinking about the future of the congregation and the kind of leader that would be needed to help that congregation move into the future. I just want to note a couple of things here in particular, and then I want us to open up and have some time for questions, particularly as I know some folks will need to leave before 1 o'clock. Congregations begin their work looking for an interim with a congregational ministry survey. And that is in the resource that I'm going to share with you. It's online, but it helps the Synod understand the needs for interim ministry. For example, the weekly worship, how often, what's the schedule, what's the attendance? Also, or is the congregation looking for part-time interim ministry, full-time interim ministry? What was the last rostered leaders call? Was it part-time? Was it full-time? Are there other staff? Would the congregation be looking for an interim ministry that would be working with a team? Or is it pretty much a solo situation? The reason for the vacancy, sometimes maybe it was a death, unfortunately, of a rostered leader. In that case, we know that there's going to have to be some grief work with the congregation, in addition to the things that I laid out earlier. So the congregation needs to complete the survey so that the Synod can assist with looking for the best fit for the congregation in an interim ministry pastor. And of course, are there any current challenges, conflict, or concern in the congregation that an interim minister would need to be made aware of before coming? And I want to say this, that interim pastors are appointed or placed by the Synod bishop. And this is from our ELCA constitution. It's not something that we've just made up. So I know, again, there's inconsistencies and a variety of practice that has happened in this Synod up till now. And some of those things are still in place. But constitutionally, interim pastors are appointed or placed by the Synod bishop, and they have the rights and duties of a regularly called pastor. Again, this is from our constitution. And so congregations that are looking for an interim pastor should just know that they come with the same rights and duties of a regular called pastor. Now, again, in terms of the duties, some of those may be spelled out in the covenant or in a contract relationship, depending upon the hours or the time, if it's part-time or if it's a full-time call. Now, I just want to say a word that about accountability, and then point you to this new resource. And Kyle, Pastor Stevenson, will help you with that link that's at the bottom of this. But during the interim pastoral time, the interim pastor submits quarterly reports to the office of the bishop. So there is accountability. And at the end of the time of that interim call, the congregation and the interim pastor submits an exit report to the Synod office as well. If there are concerns during an interim that are not able to be addressed within the congregation's existing structure, the Synod staff person that is relating to that congregation gets involved, so that there is support and assistance for that kind of a situation. So what I'm going to do here is stop and see what's in the chat. But maybe before I do that, Kyle, would you, Pastor Stevenson, would you be willing to show us how to access this resource?
Yeah, would
I'm
you?
going to stop sharing
Yeah,
so
great.
you can. All
Yeah.
right, there you go.
Perfect. So I'm going to, instead of going by a link that is super long, I'm going to show you how you can find it on the Synod's website. So I'm going to take us to that website here. This is just the main landing page of the website. Up here at the top in the purple header here, you'll see something called Documents and Resources. You click on that title and wait for it to load. Then you'll scroll down just a little bit. You'll see that there's a search up here. That is not the search you want to use. This is the search for the whole website. You want to scroll down a little bit farther where you get to the document library search and go to this search over here. And you can just type in the word interim. And right here, you'll see a document called Interim Ministry Handbook 2022. And that is our new handbook, which looks like this.
Yeah, nice.
Also on that page, sorry, I unclicked that. Also on that page, you'll see some of those reports that Pastor Wyvetta mentioned, the survey, sample covenant, to sample installation, all those things. So it's easiest, instead of just trying to scroll through this 145 different pieces of media, they are categorized. If you just go to this search and type in the word interim, we'll sort of self-select those out.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right, let's go to the chat now. Well, let me see. Are there questions of Pastor Kyle about finding that document? I don't see any hands raised. Hopefully folks were clear about that. Okay, comments that some were positive here. That's good to know. A good experience, holy work, good work. Folks who've served interims. Krista saying the training was good. Yeah, I think it is as well. Interims currently served as currently Sue is serving now as a settled pastor, but she has done intentional work. All right. So I'm going to open it up now. And if you use your raised hand feature, or just raise your hand, hopefully I can see you, or Tom can help me see you. Are there questions or clarifications about anything that I shared or that you brought with you to this workshop that you want to talk about? Okay, I don't see any hands. For those of you who, several of you said you've served, and I know, Maxina, are you still on here? I know you served with Redeemer, and Betsy was on here too, and she's a lay person at that congregation. Are there things that you, either of you, would lift up about interim ministry that you think would be most helpful for the Synod to be aware of as we're moving forward? Pastor Max, are you able to hear me?
My time at Redeemer, 4 years, was really good, but there was no Synod involvement in the beginning. So this will be this method will be completely different from from what I experienced before.
Mhm. Well, and I would say, Maxine, I know they, and Betsy can attest to this. I know Redeemer didn't want to let you go, and but I think the 4 years, it is a longer time. But we have in the resource, you will see a term also saying unintentional interim. That is to say that it goes longer than was first imagined, and that happens. But most cases, we're looking at, say, up to 3 years, not into 4. But Maxine's that kind of person. Plus, she retired 3 or 4 times, but who's counting, right? Thank you, Max. Thank you. Others. Well, you're a great bunch. I was prepared to, if I had to, put on my armor of faith and tomato shield. I don't know. I'm kidding.
Pastor Wyvetta.
I'm kidding. Okay, yes, who's speaking?
This is Betsy. Betsy from Redeemer.
Yeah, Betsy.
We've had, our experience with interims in the past, and some have been good. Most of them have been good, and one in particular is bad. But I think the one thing that you have to really stress when going into a church that hasn't had an interim before, that the congregation and the interim need to be on the same page. Like you were stressing, saying that, there were all different types of, inconsistencies. And I think that's one of, us going forward, we're aware of what they are. And, we are pretty set for that. But in the past, that was one big thing that was really a damper between the pastor and the congregation, because they weren't both on this. They didn't both have the same goal. And so that's one thing, of course, can hurt a congregation. But if you work together and they both start out on the same with the same goal,
that's a good point, Betsy. Thank you.
It's very, very helpful.
And I think too, and I don't know if I stressed it enough to say that, the Synod staff person really works with the congregation, and the bishop appoints or places the interim. And that's not always been the practice in the past, but we want it to be that the Synod staff person is negotiating with the congregation, for example, about the package and so forth, that the rostered leader is not being put in that position to have to do that. And that, again, we're looking at the best fit. And so it's not a call process. It's that's not what this is. So just work with the Synod staff person, if you're the congregation, if you're the rostered leader, because that, I think, is going to have the best chance of a good result. And the Synod motto, as we're moving this forward, is do no harm. We want to do no harm to the congregation or to the rostered leader, so that we want things to be fair too, in terms of a leader coming into a congregation, and the expectations, as Betsy was saying, to hopefully get clarification. That's not going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes.
No.
Things are not going to, and sometimes there won't be maybe the best fit. But the idea is to do what we can to try to ensure that that happens. Yeah, thank you, Betsy, for that. Anybody else? I'm trying to float back and forth here, just try to see everyone. Okay, Robin.
Pastor Wyvetta, as someone new to this process, could I ask what our interim situation in the Synod is? How many congregations are in an interim now? And how are we, are there enough of us to cover all of that? What's the overall situation?
Right. And I tried to address some at the very beginning, Robin. I don't know if you were on yet, but we have 13 trained interims right now in congregations. And let me look at this other computer here so that I hopefully kind of get this right. But we probably have about 30 to 31 rostered leaders serving in a variety of settings around some, a contract, for example, that was written with a congregation. Some are there in a commitment for up to 3 years, others maybe a year, and then it could be renewable. So there's a variety. And but right now, I think all of our requests by congregations for interims are pretty much being met. In fact, I think today one was solidified with a congregation. So that's moving along fairly well. What's beginning to happen is, and I was talking with one congregational leader who's in this workshop with us earlier, as we were waiting for people to join. Congregations are experiencing maybe financial challenges, having come out of the heart of the pandemic. Some have lost some membership and some of their givers. And so looking at, can they really afford a full-time or a part-time interim, or full-time or a part-time pastor? So that I think more congregations are doing supply and holding off right now on requesting an interim. I don't know if that'll change in 2023, but I know 2 or 3 congregations in my own conference. I served the Southwest Conference, where I was working toward providing an interim, have let me know that for right now, at least through the end of the year, they will continue with supply pastors. So we're seeing that kind of shift. The folks who are stepping forward to say that they are available is, I think, is matching with our need. I've got a couple of people who are probably going to do some training coming up in the next month. So we'll be adding to that number of 13. It may go up to 15, let's say. So, and I think as a Synod, we're prepared with leaders who would be ready to serve. And as we work with our congregations about their needs, again, I think we're making some good matches. And I hope that's answering your question, Robin.
Oh, even more than I thought. Thank you very much.
All right.
I see Pastor Sue Allen's hand.
Okay, Sue?
I had found that it was important in the past when I served in interims to really be clear and periodically reinforce as it came up that as an interim, I was not available for the call.
Good.
That they understand that and that it's reinforced along the way. Because sometimes they get really comfortable with you as the interim and like, why can't you just be our pastor?
Yeah.
And I'll say, no, that's not in my contract to do that. Plus, from my own perspective, it really gave me the freedom to be able to say the tough things that needed to be said and not worry about, you don't have to like me. I don't care. It's like,
that's right.
But I'm here to tell you the truth about these things, and I'm here to prepare you for the next pastor that will come and love you. And this is what we're doing. But that aspect of, I'm not here for this call, and no, you can't call me, was very important.
Thank you for lifting that up, Sue. I didn't mention that in my comments, but that is the expectation, that the interim pastor is not going there to become the regular called pastor. You are there for the transition. and you are not to be available to be a part of the call process. So thank you, Sue, for lifting that up. Mike, I see your hand. I'm sorry, Tom, go ahead.
I was just saying that Michael had a question.
Oh, yeah. Right. Thank you. Go ahead, Michael.
Being that there are now 13 and soon even more with that, are there thoughts about having like a cohort group that would gather on a regular basis just for support, but also to clues and also maybe updates from the Synod?
Were you listening in on our staff meeting Tuesday? Yeah, well, that's exactly what I was saying, is that now, I expect that I would. When I first started this work about a year ago, I called together then the two trained interims that we had, and did some of what you just described. So yes, I expect that there would be a gathering, probably online. I don't know, as things go forward with the vaccine and the viruses, et cetera, it might be just inviting people to come into the Synod office and be together. Or it may be a combination of both, in person and online. Haven't decided yet, Michael, but yes, there's an expectation that will happen in the coming months. Thank you for raising it.
And if that's the case, I think it would be better to have it more regular than, say once a year. I mean, some synods do it, monthly. That may be too much, but once a year may not be enough either. So I think that would be great to poll the group to see what their desires would be as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a good idea too, is to ask. And we've been good at that. I think as a Synod, trying to listen and ask groups, what's your interest, what would be most helpful. And so maybe a little survey to see how people might want to go forward with that. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Is Bishop still on with us, or is he virtual? Is that we see his face, but I want him to have an opportunity. There you go. Bishop, just want to make sure if you've got any comments you'd want to make to the group before we would.
I want to first make sure everybody can hear me all right.
Yes.
First of all, I want to thank you for being present. I am grateful for Wyvetta's work. You may not realize it, but this really has been a 3-year journey. We started this work in 2019 of soliciting information about all the different ways interims were being utilized within the Senate. And the next thing we did was we took a deep dive within our own constitution to figure out how some of these practices were lining up with the work that we were supposed to do. We had a contractor come in and just present a report over a 3-day period of, here's all the ways the Senates have been using interims within the Metropolitan Chicago Senate, and came with some recommendations. And that was a little bit over 1.5 years ago. And we've now arrived at this moment where we do have a resource that we will be getting in the hands of congregations as they begin to enter that transitional period. Those who have been trained will have, and we'll be able to gather with a baseline, that baseline being the interim training. So we had different mechanisms for how people arrived at interims, but where we are today is a direct result of our one-on-ones that we've had with so many of you. I think when we came in, we had 3 key interim leaders, and it was a self-contained group. And one of the things they asked us was to make sure it was anchored in the portfolio of one of the staff members. And so I just wanted to rehash some of that history just to let you know that many of you made these suggestions to us. We're truly grateful. It's taken us a little bit longer than we had hoped to kind of have a plan that we can all be proud of and work from. But we are now here. And so I thank you for participating in this workshop. And again, it's recorded so that if you need to point someone to a direction for this information, it should be somewhere on our website in a few days so that congregations and leaders could revisit it. But just want to say thank you, Wyvetta, job well done, and I turn it back over to you.
No, well, thank you, Bishop.
Do we want to make a reminder of our upcoming ones?
Please,
Oh,
go
there's a
ahead.
question here first from Ruth.
Go ahead, Ruth.
Hi, this is Ruth Lesher, and I'm with Sierra Pacific Synod, started at MCS. My question is, are there any interim positions that have to do with interfaith?
Well, we did have one that we thought was going to result in a placement. It was with the Presbyterian church in one of our suburbs. And so what we do in that case is, well, okay, when you say interfaith, you're talking about Christian, or you're talking.
It could be larger than that. It could be,
Okay,
you know.
well, in our case, it was with one of our communion partners. But what we did was connect the church with a trained interim pastor, and then they took that process. We were,
Okay.
at that point, it was what the Presbyterian presbytery, the local presbytery, would do. And it didn't finally result in a placement. They needed someone for, I think it was 15 hours a week. And what they wanted the person to do, you couldn't do in 20 hours a week. So, you know, you find those situations, and so it did not work out. But yes, we get contacted from time to time by a full communion partner, and then we try to assist if we are able by giving a name, and then they take it from there. Is that helpful?
All right. That is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Great.
Well, this is our first in a series of 4 of these sort of lunch and learn opportunities. And I hope you can see this email screen here. Again,
Yes.
with our upcoming ones, the next one on November 17th, facilitated by Pastor Sunitha Mortha, about our work around diversity, inclusion, and belonging, especially about how to begin to integrate those into congregational life a little bit deeper. On December 1st, I'll be leading one about call process, and we'll be looking not only about how we approach those these days, but also sort of the landscape of vacancies, as well as the availability of rostered ministers, and what do those rostered ministers look like, which may look like different kinds of candidates than have previously been the pastorate of the Lutheran Church. And then on December 8th, one led by Pastor Maria Rojas Banda and Josh Ebener about Latinx ministries, particularly looking at those December Hispanic heritage celebrations. So hope you'll join us.
Thank you so much for that, Pastor Kyle. Appreciate it. Well, I'm not one to meet just to meet, even though former staff may say that's not true. So if you're good, I am. And I just am so grateful that you took your time today to join and to share with us your experiences and some of your thoughts and questions. And if you have those going forward, you can contact me at the Synod office. You can send me an email or give me a call. I'd be glad to try to assist you. And I guess I should put my email address in the type. Kyle, would you do that? You're so good. at getting things in the chat while I'm closing this out. It's wbullock@mcselca.org. Thank you, Kyle. All right. Well, I appreciate you all. Blessings on your ministry. And thank you again for joining us today. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.